So how have the last few days been?
Um, Dreadful.
Dreadful. Yeah.
Yeah, shocking and sad, and there aren't enough adjectives.
Yeah. I've just
Um,
been seeing stuff that's coming through, and it's just the actual feeling of lying in your bed and being woken up with explosions going over next door, or somebody knocking down, or going to a festival and thinking you're having a
yeah,
great night out.
yeah, it's something we don't expect here. I mean, the shellings we're kind of used to. Obviously, we're aware and we're on constantly alert to the possibility of an attack here or there. But
Yeah.
something,
You're in Tel Aviv.
yeah.
So when you sort of say that you're used to it, I mean,
We had like a year or two ago, we
yeah,
had a shooting, a couple of terrorists with AKs or some other automatic rifle,
yeah,
roaming the streets here. We were locked up for a few hours indoors. The last operation 2 years ago, that was the first night was dreadful. Tel Aviv got hit by, well, hundreds of rockets got
yeah.
sent our way. And that was like, we were terrified.
The reports here was it was between 3,000 and 5,000 rockets that were sent.
Yeah, most of them hit the south of the country.
Yeah.
The belt surrounding the Gaza Strip gets hit the hardest. They're always under attack. People there probably have about 50% PTSD rates among the children. It's they live in shelters basically. We're not we're expecting it, but we're not
Not to the level it was.
yeah.
Thanks very much for joining us. My name's Ian Stroud.
And my name is David Malone. And this is Hyperland. Tonight, Ian and I have invited on an old friend of mine, Kostya, who lives in Tel Aviv in Israel. For obvious reasons, we were talking and thought that it would be great to hear from Kostya his own impressions of what's going on, and just talk to him a bit about the situation. Kostya and I have been talking about the situation in Israel for, last couple of years, and obviously things have now changed. So, Kostya, thanks very much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us how it's been today, at least.
Today has been relatively quiet. We got shelled a few times. A few rockets managed to land, some very near where my friends live. But for the most part, we've only had a few relatively mild interruptions to our days.
I've never heard someone call a rocket attack a relatively mild interruption to their day.
You develop a different kind of you recalibrate your expectations for mild and calm and peaceful and stressful living in a place like this.
Wow. Okay. Well, listen, apart from just wanting to know how it feels, for you, how is it changed the sort of tenor of political discussion? Because you and I have been talking about what's been going on and the political discussion around Netanyahu and all of the reforms and inverted commas to the judiciary. Has all of that now changed?
Today, in the Judicial Committee, or the Legislative Committee of the Knesset, of the Israeli Parliament, they were discussing passing, and they voted on some more of the so-called judicial reform laws, or as the protesters call it, the judicial coup, to put it mildly.
Is that giving more power to the sort of military?
No, it has not. It's giving, the main purpose of these laws is to cripple the judicial branch,
right,
and eliminate all judicial and bureaucratic oversight.
Right. So more of a dictatorship.
I wouldn't call it a dictatorship. I don't personally believe that Netanyahu is a dictator.
Right.
But
I'm glad you said that.
I really don't believe that Netanyahu is a dictator or someone who has dictatorial aspirations.
Right.
But they have been trying, him with a lot of pressure from the very right wings of his government, trying to curb the powers of the judicial to oversee and limit what the government can do.
Right.
And to give it a bit more of a, I don't know if it's a theoretical, but kind of a little bit of a framework, Israel is a very strange country in that we're a parliamentary democracy, but the power really lies with government purely. The coalitions in the last couple of decades definitely are very much obedient. Definitely in the last decade, the government decides and the coalition passes the laws, or it breaks apart, and we've seen that happen multiple times. The government we'll have elections once a year. In 2019 we had them 3 times, and the government wants to do what governments do, and it's expand its reach and wield more and more power. Why those particular individuals, particular movements, political movements want that is due to a desire to circumvent whatever remains of the human rights, international law, anything that is looking outwards.
Yeah.
But that has, I don't know if it's been killed by this event. I don't know if it's possible for those people to stop. As I said earlier, they tried to pass a few more of those little presents earlier today.
Yeah.
But the anger is rising because this is not the time.
Uh-huh.
When you say anger, do you mean the anger of those opposing Netanyahu's government?
Yes, and I think they are now being perceived by very many people as not only corrupt and power hungry, but also as more and more they're perceived as incompetent. I don't know if this sentiment will hold. We'll see what happens in the next few days, few weeks, and months. But at the moment, the chatter is not pleasant in a lot of parts of the society.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because I mean, I've been talking to Ian earlier about whether this is going to play out the way it did for Mrs. Thatcher's government with the Falklands, where she was in trouble. And then the Falklands War comes along, and suddenly she can drape her and her government in the Union Jack. And it's not to say that everyone forgot that they didn't like her, but enough people sort of put their arguments with Mrs. Thatcher on hold or made them second. And from the sounds of it, you're saying, well, that's not going to be the result of this for Netanyahu.
I don't know what will happen in the future. What I'm talking about is more long term. In the near term, there will be no change in government. No, I don't think it's possible right now. What is possible is that we'll have a broad unity government with centrist parties joining, because the Falklands War was very far away from Britain.
Yeah.
And while previous wars or operations or escalations, whatever term you may use, have at times strengthened the reigning government, this situation is different.
Right.
This is an unprecedented event in our collective memory.
I think that was my fear, was seeing a lot of the imagery coming out. I mean, it was appalling. It was, I don't see how anyone can celebrate something like this. I mean, it's been a 75 to 100 year conflict that has been going on. But my fear was that it would just give more power to serve Netanyahu. I can never say his name. Netanyahu. Yeah. To retaliate.
I don't think you need Netanyahu for that.
Right.
Yeah.
Whatever divide has been growing in Israeli society over the last few months,
Yeah.
almost a year, and the years before that, obviously. This has all been brewing under the surface for quite a while. All of that has been put aside on the ground because people have come together. We have more than 100% of the reserved duty fulfillment. So people volunteering. There has been an enormous civil society drive to step in where the government isn't operating, to care for those who need care, to whether it's psychological services or a distribution of necessary supplies of food, but also militarily.
Yeah.
I think I wrote to David on the first day that this is a Pearl Harbor class event for us. This is not some faraway war, and this isn't some regular escalation.
Yeah.
This is even more than a 9/11 for us.
Yeah.
I think the latest figures show somewhere close to 1,000 dead. Just today we had a kibbutz Kfar Aza, one of the surrounding. They let in reporters to film before, international reporters to film before clearing out the bodies. That they found dozens and dozens of children dead, decapitated.
Oh.
This is something that has struck every Israeli in the very core. There is not one person here who is not afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's worth talking about is what you and I have been discussing for the last few months, because I remember saying to you months ago that, I saw Netanyahu as the sort of the extreme right-wing figure who was pushing everybody and pushing the government. And your point to me was, which took me by surprise, you said, I think he's not the extreme. He's the last voice of moderation, was sort of the phrase you used, which completely blindsided me. Can you tell us what you meant by that?
Netanyahu has always been a very pragmatic leader. I mean, like him or hate him, the man's brilliant. He is the longest serving prime minister of Israel. He has steered us through many crises, and some quite successfully. And while he is definitely right-wing, and he is definitely a believer in the right of Israel to expand, to solidify its control, I think it would be a mistake to view him as this sort of radical extremist. What his goal has been, and I think until now it's been quite successful, is to contain the different boiling points, the different pressure points of a life here, in order to build a country, or to maintain a country and grow it as on the one hand, very strict military occupier in the West Bank, and on the other hand, as a fairly successful, calm and peaceful, very successful, to be honest, a liberal democracy, or some sort of democracy, a Western style country, with prosperity, financial prosperity, with tourism, and that has worked until now.
Okay.
What I mean by this particular government is that the problem, Netanyahu's problem historically, has been that he cheats everybody out of what he promised them.
Okay.
And at least part of the reason why none of the centrist parties, including Lieberman, who is also extremely right-wing, aren't willing to sit with him in government, is that or haven't been until now, is that he promised them things and didn't keep those promises repeatedly. Right. So Netanyahu, whether not by choice, I don't think, he got stuck with people who are much further to the right than he is.
Yeah.
And this isn't, these are open secrets. We talk about it here all the time. He always had a knack, a talent for balancing his coalitions in such a way that he didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to make those choices, because he would take Labour and the right-wing parties and maybe some centrist party and mix them up, and they would balance each other out in their demands.
Yeah.
Right now, for the last year or so, that mechanism has been missing.
I mean, it does look from the outside that those really right-wing and, at least to my ears, certainly bigoted, if not racist elements, seem to have gotten into a position to power. Are you saying that they have had now more influence on Netanyahu's government?
Yes, there are very extremist elements. I don't know if you remember, but in the early 90s, the Israeli Knesset outlawed male Kahana's party and anybody who subscribes to his ideology. We have direct successes now sitting in government.
Right. And tell us what his ideology was and what it is of these successors.
They want to institute complete domination over the space. They want to expel or subjugate Palestinians. They are outwardly racist, not in that kind of a haha funny way, and not in that oh I hate you way, but in a very concrete way.
They just don't want the Palestinians there.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, nobody does.
Right.
And this isn't just Israel. Nobody does.
Yeah.
I've heard a few years ago, I was watching some documentary or another, and there was one Palestinian activist there who said that the Palestinians are the Arab world's Jews.
Wow. Yeah.
Because nobody wants them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's become increasingly clear that lots of the states around Gaza and around the Palestinians in general, they can't claim that the Palestinians' position is their top priority at all. They've got other priorities which the Palestinians don't seem to figure in, and when they do figure in them, it's to the extent that they're getting in the way, that they're causing an embarrassment, which is an appalling thing, but seems to be increasingly the way that other Arab states are reacting to the Palestinian question, or at least that's how it looks from this distance.
I think that's pretty spot on. I mean, you can just look at the living conditions of Palestinians in refugee camps anywhere in the surrounding countries. They're appalling.
Yeah.
They're not merely second class. They have practically no rights. Whatever overtures or claims these governments made in support of the Palestinians have never been in support of the Palestinian people. They were used as a political battering ram.
Yeah. Yeah.
While it was convenient.
What do you make of Hamas or Hezbollah? Are they? I mean, obviously, you can't know much better than we can because you're on the other side of Israel's war. But do they really have the Palestinian people's best interests at heart, or are they continuing to use the Palestinian people as a political battering ram?
I don't think Hamas has any interest in the actual Palestinian people. I think it's enough to look at what has been happening within Gaza under the Hamas control over the last almost a decade and a half now.
Mm-hmm.
To see how they brutalize their own population, how they persecute any opposing views. I don't mean the civil war they had there between Fatah and Hamas for domination in, when was it, 2007. when they were dragging them through the streets and hanging them. That war is war, as they say. But I mean, anything that has been happening since.
Yes. Okay.
They are an Islamist extremist organization who have been made more extreme during the passage of these last few decades.
Yeah.
In Gaza, you've got not just Hamas, you've got Islamic Jihad in Gaza as well. Is that right? Yes.
I think Hamas controls everything in Gaza.
Right. Okay.
Like, I don't think, we generally here don't think that a rocket gets launched without their approval.
Yeah.
And when it does, the response is swift. When they don't want an escalation, they do what they can to stop it.
I thought I was led to believe that Hamas were supposedly looking after the people. They were concerned with rights and working, and there were more people working in Israel and getting maybe 10 times what they'd be getting in Gaza. So they felt as if there was something going on, which is I think why everyone was so surprised with what's happened.
I think you need to separate. You can look at Hamas before 2006 and afterwards, before 2007 and afterwards. Before, while the Fatah, the Yasser Arafat's organization, and the PLO in general were in control of Gaza.
Yeah.
They were a corrupt and incompetent regime, while Hamas was doing what the Muslim Brotherhood did in Egypt. They were providing the necessities for life for people. They were building schools. They were distributing food, medicine, everything. And that got them a lot of support back then. But once they took power, they diverted all resources to line their own ranks.
Yeah.
The security forces in Gaza, I don't know, octupled basically.
Yeah.
If there were 5,000 policemen in Gaza before that, there are 40,000 policemen in Gaza now.
Yeah.
Or whatever. I don't remember the exact numbers, but they've basically continued to impoverish their own people.
Yeah.
So I mean, basically, we've had an increasingly, I don't know what the right word is, intolerant or militant or expansionist Israeli government, and an increasingly ideologically narrow and intolerant group in power in Gaza. And that it seems like it's two bunches of vaguely psychopathic shitheads egging each other on. To use some technical terms.
I think I don't think I don't know if I'd use the word psychopathy. I think you can.
You're right. It's a cheap word. I agree.
You can look. You can find rationalizations for either point of view, but they both have their own internal logic. I think Israel's internal logic became much clearer to the world during the past few days. And I think Hamas's internal logic is also should be at least fairly clear. They do want to take over the West Bank, and they do want to take over Israel. That's not up for debate. They are not here for coexistence, and they're not here to establish, a friendly, liberal, and democratic regime.
Yeah, the two states. That isn't an option.
I think that's dead.
Yeah.
This is perhaps the final nail of that coffin.
Yeah, I mean, Israel in the last, I don't know how many months or so, have been getting more agreements with countries in the area. Do you think this and what David sort of said earlier is, it seems as if a lot of the Arab states were sort of, the Palestinians, they're kind of getting in the way. We can get on now. Do you think that was maybe the reason why it's all erupted? And there's been a lot of talk about Iran being behind, although they've said definitely they're not behind any of this.
In the last few weeks, we've been getting a lot of diplomatic chatter and reports of a potential establishment of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Which would be, and Saudi Arabia is basically the strongest power broker in the Arab world and one of the strongest, if not the strongest, in the entire Muslim world. This escalation, we have almost unanimous agreement on that here and abroad also, has a lot to do with it. Neither Iran nor Hamas want to be sidelined and have their Iran doesn't want its two biggest enemies to become friendly.
Yeah.
Officially friendly.
Yeah.
I mean, are we suggesting that there are larger power plays going on which are in some way either manipulating what's going on between Israel and the Palestinians or at least overshadowing it? I mean, because, the US has always had a staunch opposition to Iran, and the other Arab nations, like, well, certainly Saudi, I'm not quite so sure about Qatar, they dislike Iran intensely. Is this overshadowing, manipulating what's going on, do you think?
In what way? How do you think?
I don't know what to think because there are so many moving parts. I mean, I was talking to somebody else I know who knows a great deal about this, and they wouldn't tell me a great deal, but they're fond of making dark pronouncements. So they said one worry was that there were hawks in the US and hawks in Israel who would like to see a larger war against Iran and need a pretext. They need to somehow draw Iran into an actual conflict. Because it's one thing to say, right, let's have a war with Iran and just declare it. It's very difficult. You need a sort of Gulf of Tonkin kind of thing. So if you could somehow draw people into thinking that Iran was already involved in an actual conflict, whether it's in Syria or in Gaza, then you can do that. Do you think that sounds far-fetched, or do you think that there are players?
I think that sounds a little bit far-fetched. I mean, I wouldn't know. So. I wouldn't know on the. I don't think, definitely not this government, not this president in the U.S., and not these bureaucrats. They wouldn't orchestrate something like this. I don't think anybody behind the scenes would want anything like this. You know, if somebody, Israel doesn't need a reason for provocation. Like when we wanted to bomb Iraq, we made the plans.
Yeah.
When we wanted to bomb the nuclear reactor in Syria, we just did.
Yeah.
And I think pretty much everyone in Israel is in agreement that we can't just bomb the nuclear reactors in Iran and that we don't have the backing of the United States on this.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody would want to make it happen this way.
I certainly hope not. Good. All right. You were saying, that was the nail, possibly the last nail in the coffin of the two-state solution. But what other solutions can there be other than just saying, well, it's going to be like this? And because this we're talking about is sort of tiptoeing towards quite a doomsday scenario, because if the worst excesses of the real right-wing racists say, look, let's just bomb Gaza and just keep bombing it until we're happy, it will be a crime against humanity, whatever the atrocities that have already been perpetrated the other way. Surely there has to be some exit from that escalation.
I think there are two questions here that you've kind of combined into one. What possible solutions are there and what's going to happen now?
Sure, yeah, of course.
And I think what's going to happen now is that this is a this is a fuck around and find out moment. Israel's military doctrine has always been based on deterrence.
Yeah.
And that has been that has been punctured. And I don't see any possibility for anything to happen other than a very extensive operation. I don't know if it will be just bombings, if there will be a ground troops entry into Gaza, whether somebody will try to take over it. And I don't know whether that would be a good thing or a bad thing, because frankly, I don't think that the Hamas regime should continue. Not because I think that would be convenient for Israel, but I just don't think that the Hamas regime has done anything to advance the cause of the Palestinian people. It has done nothing to advance to better the lives of anybody, not Jewish, not Israeli, not Arab, Palestinian. And I think it's possible that they will attempt to remove them.
Yeah.
What will be the consequences? I don't know. Now, the second question: what are the long-term solutions? Gosh,
good luck with that, because we've been trying to sort it out for the last 75 years.
Yeah, I don't know if there is one.
Yeah.
I don't think that that it's possible to look. The West Bank will never get even a semi-autonomy that was possible just last year because of the example of Gaza.
Yeah.
You need to understand, Gaza is in the south of the country. That's like, an hour's drive away from me.
Yeah.
That's like an hour and a half drive away from me. The West Bank is 20 minutes away.
Yeah.
If the West Bank, if militants in the West Bank, if Hamas in the West Bank, for example, or any other organization gets the same even a fraction of the capabilities that Hamas in Gaza has, they will be shelling Tel Aviv all the time.
Yeah.
Nobody will ever allow that to happen.
Yeah. And from the north, from Lebanon, there's been a lot of the Israeli military were moved up there, were they not?
Yep, we're not thinking that it will be calm there.
Yeah.
In fact, it already isn't. There are fire is being exchanged across the border, bombings, and people in the northern regions have been warned to prepare their shelters. Everybody in the country has prepared their shelters, but yeah, it is very likely that Hezbollah will enter this conflict with full force.
You think Hezbollah will make common cause with Hamas, at least insofar as they're both going to attack Israel?
That's very likely. Yeah, we are potentially looking at a two-front kind of conflict.
Yeah,
war basically. This is we're not even thinking of this here as a conflict. This is war.
Yeah.
And this and if that happens, there will be there will be no breaks involved.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's been again in the press, and certainly in the UK, they've been talking about Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt are all being spoken about. Oh, they're going to come in and calm everything down, but it just, for me, it doesn't seem as if it's going to be a possibility. That Israel as a nation is kind of sort of saying, no, we're going to look after our borders. Thank you very much.
But in addition to that, the other Arab states wouldn't allow that. I mean, the Saudis absolutely detest Qatar. I mean, it was only a couple of years ago they suddenly declared overnight Qatar to be a terrorist state.
Yeah.
So they're not going to sit back and say, yeah, let's let Qatar be a world player. And I mean, for their own completely separate and cynical reasons, that's not going to happen. And Israel,
Qatar, pardon me, David, plays a dangerous game of dancing on two weddings.
Yeah.
So they're Sunni Muslim with Saudi Arabia, and then there's they have their relations with Iran are better than lukewarm.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Well, they share the world's largest gas field.
Well, that's
Exactly.
yeah. I mean, that's where a lot of speculations come. I mean, it's the second largest gas field in the world in Iran, the first in Russia. So, of course, what's happening in Russia, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that there's a connection to winter's coming, and if we can get into Iran to get access to those gas fields, but I can't really see that connection.
I don't think that's a real possibility.
No,
I think in the grand political game, the global political game, this has more to do with definitely not an axis of evil versus the good guys, but this is more of a long-term game that is built around the two superpowers of today, the US and China.
Yeah.
And the relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel that were supposed to happen, they might still, I don't know. They have more to do with an American plan to kind of fight back against the Belt and Road plan that China has been executing in the last few years.
Yeah,
sure. And China and Qatar has been much more a part of that than Saudi ever would be.
Yeah.
And it was Qataris who opened the exchange for settling contracts in oil and maybe gas as well, I can't remember, in yuan. And it was that, as far as I could see, which triggered the sudden declaration by Saudis saying Qatar were a terrorist state. It was the opening of that settlement bank and facility for the Chinese. So I agree with you that there is this great power struggle going on. But if you're right, and that not only is there an all-out war between Israel and Hamas fought out in over the bodies of people in Gaza, and if Hezbollah gets involved as well, surely the US is not going to, for domestic reasons, going to be able to step back from that, but is going to be drawn in. Do you not think?
The USS Gerald Ford, the USS aircraft carrier Gerald Ford, and its squadron of supporting players, the warships and everything, is already, or maybe already has made its way to Israeli shores.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, it was there a while ago. It was just moved closer. I mean,
well, it's in the Mediterranean fleet of the US, I think, but it's been moved closer as a signal. And I don't know if it will get involved, but Jordan has already opened its airports for American aircraft to assist if need be.
Yeah. Can I ask from my point of view, I'm a little bit interested really from your take of, we can talk about Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad as these terrorist organizations and enemies of Israel, but where do the Palestinian people fit in?
That's a good question. Hezbollah has been very busy over the last few decades establishing its dominance in Lebanon, which is one of the most tragic countries in the world, if you ask me. It used to be described as the Switzerland of the Middle East, and now it's beyond balkanized. It is so poor, and the entire southern part of it is completely controlled by Hezbollah. They've definitely established themselves as one of the premier military forces in the neighborhood. Absolutely, after their extensive experience in the Syrian civil war. But have they done anything for the Palestinians? I don't know. You tell me.
I'd say no.
I think I don't know. Maybe they do intend to do right by their own people after they win this battle, this war, this whatever I don't know what victory would look like. I don't want to think about that.
No.
But maybe they would. I don't know. I wouldn't hold my breath.
Yeah.
I mean, the parallel question to that is, where does this leave the Israeli people as well? Because we've talked a lot about the various political parties and the various ideologues and what they want, but on both sides there are just ordinary people being killed. Is there no real organized desire to find a way out of this other than simply killing each other?
Long or short term?
Well, let's talk about the short term.
No. I think.
Do you think there's just going to be a paroxysm of killing and hatred for a while until the usual people become exhausted with that?
I think that even the people who aren't out for revenge understand and agree that the situation as it has been in the last few years can't continue, and this is not a left or right thing. The situation is untenable.
Yeah.
I cannot stress this enough. The situation where the PLO controls the West Bank and basically tenuously but cooperates with Israel and has some limited autonomy there, and Hamas controls Gaza, and like a rabid dog goes on the attack every once in a while, gets kicked in between the legs, and bides its time until the next round, and we're all pretend that this is normal, while people die, but the conflict is kind of, it's simmering. That has been now proven to be an impossible pipe dream. And people have been saying this for years in Israel, both on the very left and on the very right.
Yeah.
It's a very centrist position here to kind of maintain the situation, maintain the status quo. This has definitely been Bibi's, Netanyahu's grand operating scheme to kind of maintain the status quo as long as possible until you have to deal with something, and then you go back to business as usual, and that's done.
That is certainly done, but I mean, in amongst that status quo he hasn't been able to maintain a status quo, because you have had more settlers expansion, and it has been more the intolerant part of Israeli society has become more strident. So he was losing control of that, and so surely part of the failure of that, certainly there's been a failure on the side of the Palestinians, but surely there's also been a fairly dismal failure on the Israeli side as well.
Well, I think the question is, how do you define the status quo? The status quo that has been very much accepted here as right is that there's the core part of the status quo, which is no Palestinian state, because we can't allow that to happen for all the reasons I said earlier, and no massive confrontations, no movements toward peace, no nothing. That has been a strategy of many regimes here. But the details, that's a different question. Left-wing governments still wouldn't want a Palestinian state here, but they are, as Rabin did in Oslo, and as Olmert tried and others have tried, there have been overtures and attempts to kind of move the peace process along while still maintaining this situation. On the other side of it, the status quo means that, there's no Palestinian state, and we'll keep building, and we'll keep controlling. The status quo is definitely, about the Israeli status quo is definitely about continued control.
But that's not really sustainable, is it? I mean, that was never going to work.
Well, that's why the very right wing, the brazen, bold, and stupid right wing, and those are not the same category, have been outwardly saying for years that this cannot continue. There will be bloodshed, and we need to take the first step. We need to,
strike first.
strike first.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Ian. While on the left, on the very left wing, people have been saying this cannot continue. There will be bloodshed, and we need to move towards peace. Those two sides are in agreement that the problem is that this situation is untenable.
So
You're right.
The status quo isn't a status quo, but the answer to any sorting it out. I mean, like I said before, I mean, nobody's had an answer.
Well, I think yes, there are. First of all, there are no good answers.
Yeah,
absolutely, none. I've been reading about this for years. I've looked at every little initiative that has happened, and personally, I can say that maybe some sort of confederation type arrangement would be a good idea. Maybe a one-state solution would have been a good idea back in the day. I don't know. But unfortunately, there are no proposals that seem like they could take place in this reality.
Yeah.
Well, the question then is, can Israel survive?
We ask ourselves that question a lot, and that depends on many factors. I think militarily, yes, definitely, as long as it has the backing of the United States.
But as a moral, civilized entity, the place that you would want to live and bring your kids up, can it survive?
There are many, many reasons to think that it can't survive. Even the divisions within Israeli Jewish society itself, everything we talked about with the judicial reform, those fissures are deep. They might get healed some by this, by the way, but those are big cracks. Whether Israel can survive as a moral regime in the way it treats Palestinians, well, I don't know. As long as it has the backing of the United States, possibly yes.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, most of the world is not a liberal democracy, and they managed to survive with their atrocities for decades.
Oh yeah, I mean,
the question is then whether Israel can survive as this prosperous, democratic, or semi-democratic society. I don't know. I think when it comes to Palestinians, there are three populations. There's Gaza, there's the West Bank, but there are also Palestinian citizens of Israel, Israeli Arabs, who are also not a monolith, and they are also shocked and appalled by what happened. Many of them are.
Yeah.
And I don't think that many of them want to live in a Palestinian state.
Well, not one that's run by Hamas, anyway, at least from what you've been saying.
So, I don't know, David. I can't answer that question.
No, of course. I mean, I ask you because you are you're a representative of young, hopeful, educated Israelis looking at what's going on around them. And so I take your opinions to be at least in some way indicative of a thoughtful part of Israeli society, the part of Israeli society that you would hope might get the upper hand. I mean, is it too simple to say if Israel could rein in its more religiously fervent settlers that this would solve the problem, or is that just so simplistic that it's not worth?
I think that is very simplistic. Those, the divisions along the security and war lines they're not limited to this settler block, or I don't know, maybe about 10% of the population. But voters of Likud, the reigning party, and would never accept anything similar to the disengagement that brought us Hamas-controlled Gaza. And they would not support moves in the direction of giving Palestinians more of a possibility to inflict damage. Absolutely. I think the ultra-Orthodox parties, and at least their voters, are moving rightwards politically and have been for many years. And again, even regular run-of-the-mill, high-tech working centrist Israelis, we all have friends and family who do get bombed very regularly, even in peaceful times.
Yeah.
So I think it's not about reining in the religious settlers. If any step could be a first step towards forget that. I don't have a first step.
I was feeling hopeful there for a second.
I thought you were about to say that if any step could lead to something that was more peaceful, it would be a good step.
Well, this is a pipe dream, but
Yeah.
I think a good step would be a peacekeeping force led by Arab regimes, Egypt and Jordan and hell, even Saudi Arabia, taking over the Gaza Strip and establishing something like post-World War II processes.
Yeah.
That would be a good step in the eyes of Israelis.
Right.
Well, I mean, that would, I can see that working as long as there was some kind of Gaza version of the Marshall Plan, because it wasn't just that England, France, Russia, and America put down troops in Germany. If that's all we'd done, then there'd still be fighting. But they said we have to rebuild it. Yeah. And no one has attempted in any way to rebuild Gaza. It's
no,
just
absolutely.
a big prison.
You're absolutely right. It is a big prison, and it's not a big prison. You remember Escape from New York?
Yep.
Yes.
That was a big prison.
This is their life. This is I'm not kidding. This is their life. It's dreadful there. And yes, I absolutely. It's something like a Marshall Plan would have to take place, because.
Then why hasn't it, Kostya? Because it's difficult to. I can't, even if I try to put myself in the other shoes, come up with an argument about why that's a terrible thing.
Who wants to do it?
Why hasn't it?
Nobody wants it. Nobody wants to deal with this problem. When Begin, the Likud prime minister, signed the peace treaty with with Sadat, with Egypt, the Egyptians didn't want Gaza. The Jordanians don't want the West Bank. Nobody wants to deal with this problem.
Yeah,
they're all happy. They're all happy to sweep it under the Israeli rug.
Yeah. Do they not want it because it's poor, so that if there was a proper Marshall Plan and they said we're going to pump money in there, proper money, not just hand it out to people so that they can put it in their private Swiss bank accounts, but somehow actually rebuild an infrastructure and industry and a way for people to actually make a living? Would they want it then, or do they not want it for other reasons? In other words, they wouldn't even want a wealthy, happy, prosperous Gaza.
I don't think that people don't want a prosperous Gaza. I think, well, definitely I'm sure there are factions. I'm not an expert or even particularly knowledgeable on the Arab world to know what goes on factionally in the Egyptian army or in Syria or Jordan or anything like that. But I'm sure that there are people who are happy to use the Palestinian people as a kind of some sort of bludgeoning tool to kind of stir the pot every once in a while. Sorry for mixing metaphors, but I'll put it this way: imagine if on the other side of the globe, the regime in North Korea collapses. How do you unify the two Koreas? How do you rebuild it?
Yeah.
I don't think the South Koreans want to do that, even though they say they do. Officially, they claim that they want a unified Korea. I think if that were to happen, they would be petrified, because the expenditure of resources is unbelievable. This isn't some, slap a few $1 billion band-aid on it and call it a day kind of situation. This is you need to get the entire surgical team, all the teams from all the hospitals, to operate on this perforated body.
Yeah, and as you say, the problem is that even if it were just Gaza, that would be an enormous problem. But you have Lebanon and you have Syria. Now that we've been dropping bombs all over it and turning that into another sandpit. I mean, that's part of the problem, isn't it? That there was an actual foreign policy name for turning Syria into a sandpit, and they've already done it in Lebanon, and one gets the suspicion that people are happy to see Gaza as a sandpit, just the place where you make a place that's attractive to all the ne'er-do-wells that you don't like, or the extremists that you don't like and have probably also managed to create. But you give them a place where they're going to want to be, so you can keep an eye on them. That's what the sandpit idea was, and it just looks like it's growing.
I don't know if you can connect Gaza and the Palestinians in this way. I don't think the Palestinians are a jihad destination in the same way that Chechnya or Syria were in their heyday. I think they have enough cuckoos of their own.
Okay.
I honestly think that this is just such a mess that they just don't want to. What will Egypt do with it? Egypt has 80 million people. I think they have an extremely young population. I think the average age is somewhere in the 30s.
Yeah.
If like low 30s. They are mostly rural. They have no jobs. They sometimes have very little food, and they have a brewing water crisis with Ethiopia.
You're expecting 2.2 million people in Gaza to come into Egypt, and like you said, it's had the big stirring pot. It's not going to work, is it?
Even if they don't take them in, if they don't have the money or resources to send there. Jordan doesn't. The only people who do are the Gulf states.
Yeah.
And I've never worked in the Gulf states, but a lot of people do have, and the stories are pretty unanimous that the work is not done by Saudis.
Oh no,
that's true. I have people who've worked there. I know people who've worked there for years, and I mean it's one step away from a slave economy.
Yeah, I've heard, like, I have a mate who said that their company paid Saudis because they have to, but they paid them extra to not come into the office because they don't do work and they don't want to. They're an oil oligarchy.
Yeah,
they don't need to roll up their sleeves, and I don't think anybody wants to roll up their sleeves for Palestinians.
Yeah.
Well, we could continue talking about this, but I don't think we'd get anywhere. It is one way or the other, it's going to be down to young Palestinians and young Israelis to sort this out. Otherwise, one or other of you is not going to be living in the Middle East.
Yeah. You're right. I mean, I don't know how long we can maintain this. A few decades at most. And I don't mean like close to a century. I mean a few. But I don't know. This is, as far as I can see, a very hopeless situation. And long term, and short term, it's going to get very bloody.
Yeah.
Listen, Kostya, thank you for talking to us. I wish it had been a more uplifting conversation, but it's good to hear opinions from inside Israel rather than those that get mediated through our press, which has its own agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what are they saying in your press?
Well, it depends who you read, but at least in something like The Guardian, which is, I would say, the sort of the official voice of the globalist progressives. That's how I think, well, certainly how I see them. They're saying that Hamas's actions are, there's no excuse for them, full stop, but that you can't ignore the slightly longer term context of the rise of Hamas, that unless one looks at what has been happening in Gaza and the rightward march of Israeli politics, that you're not going to tell the story accurately. So at least they're saying one has to look at both sides, and both sides have contributed to the situation we're in now. And within that, they're saying, everyone says the US has to sort this out, which would make me smile if it didn't make me want to cry, because the thought of a senile Biden or an idiot Trump sorting anything out is just risible.
Yeah. I don't know how the US could sort any of this mess out. I don't know how anybody could, but I just want to leave with one last point then. And in certain important ways, like the Hamas is the fault of Israel, not their anger, not their actions, but their continued rule. I think part of the strategy for at least some of the more hawkish and settler-oriented parts of the ruling coalitions here has been maintaining this separation between Gaza and the West Bank, by having two different ruling forces in each one. Mm. And when you have that separation, you cannot have a peace process.
Yeah. Too fractured.
And that strategy has also, I think, has come to an end now. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
We will. I wish there were more voices like yours in some position of authority, but there aren't.
Don't. Yeah. If there were more people like us in positions of authority, maybe things would be a little bit better. But it's just not how the world works. Who was it that said you should never let anybody rule who actually wants to rule?
Yeah.
Well, listen, we talked about the Palestinians, we talked about the Israelis, we talked about America. I wonder what Europe should be doing, but we'll talk about that another day.
Sure thing, David.
Costa, thank you very much for coming on. It's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah,
thank you, Ian. Thank you, David.
Sending you love and hope, mate.
Thank you. Take care.